several projects related to COVID-19 because I study the relationship between business, the relationships between business and society, and more broadly, issues of corporate social responsibility and ethics and corporate governance. There's a lot that's relevant to the current COVID crises that we're going through right now. So one of my projects that I'm working on is related to the big issues, those wicked issues that are coming out of the pandemic. For the marginalized stakeholders, those those minority groups, people in emerging countries. We see the terrible impact of COVID in Brazil, for example. And so my studies look at what are the ramifications of this horrible pandemic for those marginalized stakeholders, those that can least afford to represent themselves. So that's very broadly what I'm doing. As an editor of a journal called Business and Society, we've actually put a call out to a number of scholars in a special issue to study the ramifications of COVID for marginalized stakeholders. So that's one big kind of broad project I'm working on. More specifically, I recently wrote a blog about the implications of COVID for corporate governance, and specifically for boards of directors. Back in 2019, well, even before that, but in 2019, there was a large statement from the Business Roundtable representing over 100 CEOs from large publicly traded corporations, where they made a commitment to thinking beyond just the stockholder and thinking about broad stakeholders, suppliers, government relations, the employees. And it was huge for business to have a broad statement like that. It was published in many media outlets. And my blog related to the fact that the COVID-19 crisis is almost a litmus test for these CEOs of these large publicly traded corporations. Are they really going to continue along that mission of paying attention to their broader stakeholders? Or, as perhaps we fall into some economic challenges as a result of the pandemic, will they shift backwards to more of a shareholder focus, with the shareholder being the ultimate and the primary stakeholder that they concentrate on, which has huge ramifications for business, because for years, actually for the last 20 or 25 years, there's been this idea out there that when companies do well, they will certainly be able to engage in broader stakeholders and think about social issues. But we also know that companies that think about social issues and broader stakeholders are rewarded by those people, their shareholders and their suppliers and the government. So there's this correlation that goes on. And so, the idea that we've evolved so much into this broader thinking about, some call it conscious capitalism, some call it corporate social responsibility. So some people call it corporate citizenship. It comes under all these names, but I worry that in a crisis like this, and particularly the economic ramifications from this, that there will be a shift back in business to thinking solely, maybe even solely, but primarily for the stockholder, the bottom line, the big bottom line, instead of what we now come to know as more the triple bottom line. A pandemic for researchers, we call it a natural experiment. It's really, unfortunately, it's a natural experiment. So, it's a shock, an external shock that then serves as a natural experiment for us to test certain questions that we've been thinking about. Crisis management comes to mind as well, right? This is, the ultimate crisis management. And again, speaking to the research that I was talking about before about broader stakeholders, one of the things we know about companies managing in crises is their best line of defense, so to speak, is to think broadly about all their stakeholders. When any kind of crisis happens, you want the businesses that survive are the ones that think about not just for that bottom line, but also the ramifications for their suppliers, their customers, their employees. And so there's something to be excited about in this natural experiment. So what's next is, we're still, unfortunately, we're still in the middle of this pandemic. So it's almost a little early to analyze the effects. So what we can do, again, as a researcher who straddles the normative, so the things that we woulda, shoulda, coulda do, and as well as the descriptive, what is, I think I'm shifting now to the normative right now. We can talk about what should we do um, regarding those broader issues of corporate social responsibility and broader stakeholders and issues like climate change and clean water and public health and safety. Those are the shouldas, and we can talk about those now. So that's where I am right now. I'm talking about, it's ironic, I was working with Fred Ledley in the center about public health issues and the idea that business as a whole don't put public health as really on their radar, their top issues, even when they're talking about corporate social responsibility. Public health is difficult. It's hard to define. What does that mean? Public health? Is it clean water? Is it clean air? Is it offering healthcare to employees? So there's a lot of things that fall under public health, and Fred and I have been discussing how unfortunately, public health isn't taken on by businesses unless it's part of their business mission. So, for example, Colgate produces toothpaste, so it's easy enough for them to donate toothpaste to underprivileged populations. But other companies might not think about clean teeth and healthy teeth. Here we are in a pandemic, though, which is a public health issue. So now it's on everybody's radar, so to speak. And, I think that's interesting to talk about too. Public health coming to the forefront now because people everywhere are suffering.